I want to double click on governance because, I love governance. And it's not just because I once worked at an identity governance vendor, but because when you think about doing zero trust, every, I would say without exception, right, in every enterprise, what you're doing is you're defining these access policies and they're using contextual attributes, et cetera. But underneath all of that is a real requirement that organizations improve the rigor and the discipline and essentially the governance of their processes. And we'll look at two really simple, maybe three simple examples, right? So identity group membership, very, very common attribute to use in an access policy. And it's a great one to use. Now, you can have the world's best zero trust system, and it consumes that identity group membership and it makes an access decision based on that. But you can only do that if you have a high degree of confidence that only the right people are in that identity group and no wrong people are in that identity group. So how do you do that? Well, you have to have identity governance processes. There's got to be some discipline around joiners, movers, leavers. If you don't have that, if you have the wrong people in the group and maybe the right people, some of the right people aren't in the group, that policy is not going to work for your organization. You're going to cause both false positives and false negatives, and it's going to cause all sorts of problems. So you're relying on, I have to use the word trust, right? You trust that process, you rely on that process to give you good, reliable data in terms of group membership, or that process or that whole policy is not going to work. Likewise, on the infrastructure side, right? The workload side, when you deploy a workload in your environment, you're relying on the fact that that workload does what it's supposed to be doing, that there isn't malicious code in there, that even something like your DNS, your private DNS, returns the right result. So it's not pointing people to malicious servers or incorrect servers or things like that. So there has to be some discipline and governance and rigor around your enterprise change management processes. So this is, we could think of it as, residual trust, so to speak, in the system, or maybe it's just residual reliance on these governance processes. And it's something that has to be explicitly called out. And if you don't have control of those things, it's going to be very difficult for you to be successful with zero trust. Now, that's not to say you have to kind of amp up and make everything super formal, but you have to have some areas where you have confidence and you say, yes, we're doing a really good job on, or a reasonably good job on governance for this group over here. So we're going to build policies on it. These groups over here, they're a big mess right now, but we're going to improve them over time.
So Jason,
Go ahead. Yeah, while I
yeah,
share this,
I
go ahead.
want to talk about that for a second, because when we talk about governance and you talk about roles and groups and how are you applying these and making sure the right people have the right access at the right time, you hear that all the time: right people, right time, right access. And if you think about these access policies, you have to go more, you have to go deeper than this to this top down analysis around how do I create, what do these attributes look like, right? How do I ensure that, the accountant who has the same title as the person in LA or New York City who has two different financial management systems has the appropriate access to support that? That's more than a top down conversation, right? So in a governance world, first you have to be able to do that. And let's just call it like it is. We call that roles. We do that all the time. And if you've ever heard me speak about roles, I have said quite often that roles should go away. But again, I'm practical. I understand from an enterprise perspective, you still have to have roles because it makes sense. But
we'll continue to agree to disagree on that one.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fine with that. But what I will add to that, right, is you got to take, in addition to that top down approach, you also have to take that bottom up approach, and you got to spend time around entitlements across applications, entitlements across systems, whether it's asset management or assets in the environment, whether it's applications, firewalls, hardware, whatever it happens to be. You've got to take that context or the entitlements associated with those systems, bring them in to drive these governance systems as well. So it's more than just top down, it's top down, bottom up, bringing these things in the middle. And what that really does from my perspective is now you've got a cleaner or a more productive access policy that says, hey, I do have the right people that's driving the groups that are part of the appropriate groups across these systems, so I can create an effective access policy. I could spend a lot of time on that, and I've done that a lot. But I think RBAC is a big conversation, especially when you start talking about next gen identity and should you have it.